The child was already unconscious when help finally arrived. Bruises covered his small body from head to toe, some old, some fresh, some layered on top of injuries that never had time to heal. Marks that no single accident could explain. Marks that told a story long before anyone dared to speak. As sirens echoed through the street, strangers gathered in silence. No one knew what to say. No one knew where to look. And in that moment, a single question began to haunt everyone involved. What really happened before anyone called for help? Across the world, thousands of mysteries remain officially unresolved. Cases where the truth exists clearly, visibly, undeniably, written in medical reports, captured on cameras, logged in records, yet somehow buried under fear, silence, broken systems, and carefully constructed lies. Tonight, we step into one of the darkest fictional mysteries ever imagined for a Netflix-style documentary. A story that was presented as a tragic accident. A story that authorities initially accepted. A story that only began to unravel when the evidence refused to stay quiet. This mystery centers around a young child who had only recently been reunited with his mother after years away from her care. For most of his short life, he lived under supervision. His days were monitored. His environment was controlled. His safety was documented by agencies whose sole purpose was to protect children like him. Every bruise was questioned. Every injury was photographed. Every concern was written down. For years, the system watched closely. And then suddenly, it stopped. Just 3 months after returning home, everything went wrong. According to the official story told that day, it was a tragic accident, a simple fall, something that could happen to any child. A moment of bad luck followed by devastating consequences. It was an explanation that required no investigation, no accountability, no uncomfortable questions. It was easy, comfortable, and completely false, because the child's body told a very different story. Emergency responders were called to a public place in the middle of the afternoon. A location surrounded by people, a place where help should have come quickly. Witnesses later described confusion and fear, a mother asking strangers to call emergency services. Some recalled panic in her voice. Others noticed something colder, something strangely delayed. By the time paramedics arrived, the child was not breathing. There was no pulse, no response to stimulation. Attempts to revive him were immediate but unsuccessful. CPR continued longer than usual, not because there was hope, but because no one wanted to accept what was already obvious. Less than an hour later, the child was pronounced dead. At first, investigators accepted what they were told: a fall at a nearby park, a sudden collapse, a terrible coincidence layered on top of a painful family history. But as the hours passed, cracks began to form in the narrative. There was no water at the scene, no witnesses who saw a fall, no park nearby matching the description given, and no logical explanation for the severity of the injuries found on the child's body. When detectives reviewed surveillance footage from earlier that day, the case took a darker turn. Long before help was called, the child appeared motionless, slumped forward, unresponsive, not reacting to movement, not reacting to sound, not reacting at all. Medical examiners later confirmed the most disturbing detail of all: the injuries were not consistent with a single fall. They showed patterns, repeated trauma, bruising in stages of healing. marks that suggested force applied again and again over time. This was not an accident. This was escalation. What had first been treated as a tragic incident quietly transformed into a homicide investigation. Detectives began questioning the adults closest to the child. What they encountered was not cooperation, but contradiction. Stories changed mid-sentence, timelines shifted by hours. Details appeared only when convenient, then disappeared just as quickly. One version described discipline, another denied it entirely, another blamed confusion, another blamed fear. Each explanation conflicted with the last. The child had complained earlier that day: chest pain, difficulty breathing, fatigue so extreme he could barely keep his eyes open. He refused food, refused water, all warning signs, all noticed, all ignored. Surveillance footage only deepened the mystery. The caregiver was seen walking calmly through public spaces, while the child sat slumped forward, unmoving. No checks for breathing, no attempt to wake him, no urgency in her movements. Minutes passed, then more minutes, then more. Only when strangers noticed something was wrong did panic suddenly appear, and even then it felt delayed, almost rehearsed, as if the performance mattered more than the outcome. Investigators were forced to ask the hardest question of all: was this panic genuine or performance? As the story unraveled, another disturbing truth surfaced. The system that once protected the child had recently stepped away. Supervision had ended. Protective oversight was removed, despite documented concerns, despite past warnings, despite unresolved risks. The child had been returned anyway. Medical findings would later confirm the unthinkable. The fatal injury occurred hours before help was ever called. The child would not have survived long after it happened. Minutes, not hours. Which meant someone knew. Someone knew the child was dying. Someone knew the injuries were severe. Someone knew time was running out. And someone chose silence. The mystery was no longer just how the child died. It became about why no one acted sooner, why fear outweighed responsibility, why lies felt safer than truth, and why protection failed when it was needed most. In the end, accountability arrived, but far too late. Justice followed, but it could never undo what had already been lost. No verdict could restore trust. No sentence could return a life that should have been protected. This fictional mystery remains unresolved in the most unsettling way possible, not because evidence was missing, not because answers were impossible to find, but because the truth was ignored when it mattered most. Stories like this force us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes the darkest mysteries aren't hidden in shadows or locked rooms. Sometimes they happen in daylight, in public, in plain sight. And sometimes the most haunting question isn't who did it, it's why no one stopped it. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think really happened before? Anyone called for help? And if there are other dark mysteries you want uncovered, let me know below. Welcome to Dark Room Stories, where some truths never leave the room.